Welcome, Derek, and thanks for joining me this morning. Thought it was timely to have a catch up and find out a bit more about ESOS Phase 3. We've obviously had the government consultation which completed in July, and I was wondering if you could share your findings on what that was all about. So maybe if you could start by giving us a bit of background. Why did the government have this consultation?
Yeah, as you know, we're in Phase 3, as you've just talked about. We're in Phase 3 of ESOS. ESOS effectively started in 2014. Phase 1 ended in 2015, Phase 2, 2015 to 2019. We're now in Phase 3. And so far, it's been very much repeat exercise in terms of the guidance. There's not been many changes to the guidance over the sort of 5 or 6, 7 years that we've been working on ESOS. So approximately 12 months ago, the government looked at ESOS and asked a number of questions to various parties about ESOS and looking at ways to improve the quality and the effectiveness of ESOS as a scheme. So they had a consultation, and in July the results of the consultation were issued, and talking about how they want to change ESOS moving forwards.
Okay.
And this will impact both on Phase 3 and certainly as we move into Phase 4 at the end of next year, there will be a lot more changes likely.
And before we start talking about the changes that have been recommended from that consultation, from a legal perspective, where do customers stand at the moment?
As we stand today, if you go onto the .gov website, the ESOS guidance is dated 1st of February 2021. So the consultation that's been published provides detail on a number of changes that they want to implement within Phase 3, and also talks more heavily about Phase 4 and how ESOS will develop into Phase 4. With Phase 3, the actions that they want to implement still have to go through Parliament, so we have to gain parliamentary approval on those actions. So as it stands today, yep, the guidance is from last year, if we go online, but the likelihood is that these changes will be, there are a number of changes that will be implemented within Phase 3.
Okay, so I guess given the parliamentary schedule and everything else that's going on in the world right now, is there a risk that this might not even get through Parliament?
I wouldn't like to comment on that, but we've only got 14 months left of Phase 3. As you alluded to, there's a lot going on within the government at the moment.
So our advice to companies out there at the moment is really parliamentary schedule is out of our control.
Most definitely.
Approach ESOS Phase 3 as though the recommendations have now been enacted. To cover yourself, really. That's the safe option.
Yeah, absolutely. And our advice for a number of months, a couple of years now, is to act on Phase 3. The changes that will likely be implemented, we can react to, but to get the work done is the most important thing, because we have what is now becoming an increasingly tight schedule to complete the work.
Yeah. Okay. So perhaps you can share with me then what are some of the changes that have been recommended that are different from Phase 1 and Phase 2? Yeah,
some of them are fairly simple. They talk about issuing a standardised template. So at the moment there is guidance on in terms of the reporting mechanism for ESOS, but the government, as part of the consultation, are talking about issuing a standardised template. So whoever has to comply with ESOS, the report that's issued, if like as part of that compliance exercise, is done to a standard format, so it includes all the information that the government wish. So that's one of the changes.
Has that required any additional learning for lead assessors, or is it just
as it stands at the moment? The work we do, the way we prepare that report, it's basically no change for us. We've included a lot of the items that they talk about, but we don't have that finite detail of it, and we don't have access to that proposed template, so we don't know. But we feel that the work that we do at Trident, it certainly covers the main points that they talk about.
So I'm guessing over the last couple of phases then the government have found that there's been degrees of variation in terms of what's been reported and the quality of those reports, so they're hoping to cover that off.
Absolutely, and I think most consultations that work with ESOS have improved their delivery as we move forward. As we've done, we've improved the quality of templates and such like.
So Derek, what are the other key recommendations coming out of the consultation?
Okay, well, de minimis. Historically, ESOS has had a 10% de minimis, and part of the consultation, one of the recommendations for phase 3 is the reducing that de minimis to 5%. So this is essentially it's the percentage of energy that you can exclude from that review, that survey process. So historically 10%, no, yeah.
Am I right in thinking companies have always had to report on 100% of
Correct,
their...
yeah.
Okay, so dropping to 5 might just mean that they need to do more detailed survey work of
It
that
could bring a fuel in. I say transport's sometimes an obvious one, but not always. But it can bring in an additional fuel within that survey process that could have been excluded when it was 10%. If it was, if gas oil was 9%, for example, you historically wouldn't have had to have reviewed that. You could have chosen to, but now with it being 5% or less that you can exclude, it could bring other fuels into that survey process. And this can potentially have a knock-on effect on work that's already been carried out where you've preempted based on a 10% de minimis. But again, we've tried to cover that within the work that we've done.
So I'm guessing additional time taken, which will mean a little bit of increased cost potentially for some customers compared to what they did in phase 2?
Absolutely, yeah. Okay. It's something that customers need to be aware of. Another notable point from the consultation relating to phase 3 of ESOS is the introduction of an energy intensity metric.
Oh, right. So similar to how companies will be used to reporting on their streamlined energy and carbon report.
Exactly that, yeah. And the consultation gives 3 examples of the kilowatt hours per metre squared for buildings, kilowatt hours per unit of output for production activities, and kilowatt hours per mile for transport.
So do companies have to choose one of those 3, or is there some flexibility? Can they select another one?
This is unclear at the moment. Those are the 3 examples that they talk about within the guidance, within the consultation. They've not said whether you can actually introduce your own energy intensity metric. For example, turnover and FTE are typical that we use for SECA reporting. Yeah. Okay. One of the failings of the project has been we consultants have identified opportunities for saving energy as per the definition of the project. There's no, if you like, stick for companies to implement these actions. Now, logic says if they're good, true actions and fall within a specified payback period, that you will implement them because it's a direct cost saving. Yeah. Now, part of the consultation talks about companies producing action plans. So you'll have a set of recommendations from the surveys, from the reports, and it's actually putting a programme in place to implement those actions or address why, if you choose not to implement them, why. Okay. It's basically an action plan.
And I guess this is symptomatic of the government's overall drive to net zero, isn't it? We've seen with other pieces of legislation, such as PPN 0621, that companies now have to have a credible carbon reduction plan if they want to bid for larger government contracts. So there seems to be some alignment coming on here from various government initiatives. Yeah.
The government's got a net zero target, and ultimately the work from ESOS, the opportunities identified from ESOS and other projects, they need to be implemented to ensure that the government meets those targets. It's our responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility. So it's really putting more onus on the organisations to consider those recommendations and recommendations won't always be implemented, but at least justifying and understanding why they've not been implemented, or putting an action plan in place to say that currently with the technology it's not viable, however in 2 years time we'll review it and the technology might have changed. So it's really trying to push forward that net zero journey.
Sure. So from a compliance perspective then, what do customers need to make sure is in that report that's different, I guess, from
right.
phase 2?
Well, for phase 3 it's difficult to comment at the moment, but we're certainly we at Trident, we don't and we haven't just focused on the energy savings. We also include, if we identify opportunities for reducing carbon, we tend to include those in the reports as well. There are instances when potentially there is actually an energy increase, change in fuel types, for example. You might have a much lower carbon emissions factor, but you may have to put more of that fuel into the equipment. So we've always looked at carbon opportunities as well, and certainly our focus moving forwards will really be encompassing all aspects of carbon reduction.
And I think you've hit a very important point there, Derek. For phase 1 and phase 2, certainly many of the customers we've spoken to, they've often viewed it as just ticking a compliance box. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
ESOS Phase 3, however, we're seeing a notable change in customer responses to it, aren't we? I think the cost of electricity obviously has shone a light. And for us, ESOS really just sits in the middle of those sort of 3 C's of energy where, yes, it's compliance, it's cost reduction potentially, and obviously carbon reduction. What are you, so how are we approaching Phase 3? I guess you've touched on it a little bit, but beyond compliance, what else are we looking to incorporate in our surveys and our reports?
Yeah, well, as I've just talked about, we already include carbon opportunities. So where we've identified, and some of them might not relate to energy, but we try and report on carbon opportunities, and I think that will get expanded into ESOS is primarily looking at Scope 1 and Scope 2, but as we move forward potentially into Phase 4, we'll be looking at opportunities for Scope 3 emission reductions as well.
Give us an idea. What are a couple of the examples of things that you've found or that you've identified on surveys that relate to carbon, not necessarily energy saving?
Okay. Well, and the obvious one is looking at different fuel types. Without going into specific details, quite often with lower carbon fuels, there's potential that you're actually putting more. They have a lower calorific value, and therefore you're potentially putting more energy. You're consuming more energy, but the resultant carbon emissions are much lower, particularly around diesel fuels and such like. So there can be actually a negative, an energy increase, but a significant reduction in your associated carbon emissions. And now, whilst that goes against the initial ethos of ESOS, we feel it's important to put it into the report because it provides the full picture for an organisation that's looking at that energy reduction, but also that carbon reduction journey, which is becoming more and more of a focus.
Okay. In recent months, I guess because of the price of electricity, we've had a lot of customer inquiries around things like solar PV.
Yeah.
Payback periods, used to be 8 to 10 years, perhaps a year or two ago. Now they're down to maybe 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. How would we be approaching a project like that in relation to ESOS? Where does that sit?
Again, solar PV is typically an opportunity that we review pretty much on any site that we go on. And you're right, the payback, maybe 5 years ago, 3 years ago, the focus on PV, it was much more of a forward-thinking technology. With the cost of electricity increasing, and particularly, again, companies thinking about this net zero journey, the opportunities for PV are increasing. We've always tried to incorporate PV recommendations where appropriate, but there's a lot more interest now, and as that payback's reducing, but it really does fit in with that net zero journey moving forwards.
But to be clear though, is it a requirement of ESOS Phase 3 to report on those things, or is this more our response to customer demand wanting to look at these things?
I've always taken the approach we think just above, we think beyond the guidance, and if you look at the original ESOS guidance, there wasn't that focus on on-site generation, for example. Okay. We've where applicable, we've incorporated that because it's part of that journey that an organisation needs to be taking.
So I guess for anybody considering how to choose a lead assessor out there, much will come down to what they want out of their ESOS report. What advice have you got to companies when selecting a lead assessor? What should they be looking for?
Right, it's interesting, and just to recap a little on the process with ESOS, the work has to be overseen by an ESOS accredited lead assessor, qualified lead assessor. Some of the site survey work, for example, doesn't have to be done by an ESOS lead assessor. However, at Trident, all the engineers at Trident are also qualified ESOS lead assessors. And I think it's important that you select a lead assessor and an organisation that has the experience within your industrial sector or your commercial sector, which we at Trident do. It's important to understand how the work will be conducted beyond that lead assessor. So the organisation that you engage with to complete ESOS, it's understanding who will be completing that work and at what level that person is in if you like, experience to deliver that work. It's the ESOS Lead Assessor is the person that, if you like, oversees it, that polices it, that makes sure you're compliant. But it's really getting into the detail of who's doing what within that process.
Yeah, so you're looking for not just a lead assessor, but a lead assessor that's got the support of a whole team of individuals that have got the knowledge and experience to
the support,
to deliver
the experience, the knowledge, the track record. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think, just to interrupt 1 second, that's another thing that the consultation talks about more into phase 4 is the quality and the experience of ESOS lead assessors is likely going to be reviewed, and the potentially even talking about industry specific experience with lead assessors. So I think it's important for phase 3, but certainly as we move forward beyond phase 3.
So might that mean lead assessors need recertifying in some way?
The implication,
for specific industry sectors?
The implication is, I think they will be reviewing the ESOS Lead Assessor accreditation process. Experience is always the key. Make sure your ESOS Lead Assessor has the experience in your sector.
So with that in mind, that sounds like, in phase 4 at least, there may be even more scarcity of qualified lead assessors. We've known it's been a problem in phase 1 and phase 2. Mm-hmm. People don't have to actually submit their final report until December 23.
Correct.
The reporting period doesn't really start until December this year.
Mm-hmm. The qualification date.
Sorry, the qualification date.
Yeah, it's the 31st of December 2022.
Thank you. We've touched on scarcity into phase 4. We've seen in phase 1 and phase 2, as people left it late, there was scarcity of lead assessors. Some might consider taking action now in September as being a bit early. What advice, what's your opinion on that?
The forward-thinking customers have already engaged. We've completed site surveys for some of our customers now. So they're benefiting from the site surveys, from the information from the site surveys, from the energy-saving opportunities. They're already benefiting from those opportunities. Yeah, so they're already making reductions, particularly with the cost increases that we're seeing at the moment. So they're already benefiting from it. So in many instances, it will cover the cost of the work that's been carried out.
Clearly, over a year to go until the compliance date. Why should companies be acting now rather than leaving it until next year?
There are many answers to that question. The forward-thinking companies are not just acting now; they've acted 1, 2, 2.5 years ago. We've been doing surveys. Post-COVID, we've been carrying out ESOS surveys, and we've actually completed site surveys now for a number of organisations. So in terms of that compliance journey, they're well on the way, and the benefit that they've got is they've had that access to the site reports, so they've been able to see where they have real energy savings and been able to implement them. So they're actually benefiting from a cost perspective. But the more recent rises in energy costs, they're benefiting from those opportunities.
Absolutely. The cheapest kilowatt hour you can buy is the one you don't use, right? So if they're able to reduce that right now, then they've been the big winners over the last few months. Yeah,
and we have surveys planned literally throughout the next 12 months, 14 months. The resource will become an issue as we move forward, as we've seen in phase 1 and phase 2, the resource of ESOS lead assessors and people capable of delivering a quality site survey or survey on transport. The availability of those people will diminish. So it's important that you engage early. That work has to be planned. Site surveys can be time consuming. It can put into the diary to make sure all relevant people are available, then to write the reports thereafter, plus compile the ESOS compliance work. It really is critical that you engage as soon as possible. We can't wait till the phase 3 consultation's gone through Parliament. We have to preempt what the likely changes are.
Yeah, there won't be enough time for everybody to get their surveys done if we wait that long, will it? So,
and if you do leave it, say that availability of people to carry out the work diminishes, and you become you just get closer and closer to that deadline, and the risk of non-compliance and the potential financial implications of that.
Yeah, like with all things, scarcity increases the value of something, right? So less supply of lead assessors. If demand remains high, people will like that.
It's a supply of quality personnel to deliver, and we've seen that historically.
Looking ahead to phase 4, have we seen anything in the consultation that doesn't necessarily apply to phase 3, but as a nod to the future, we can see other things that companies need to consider.
Oh, most definitely, yeah. And a lot of the consultation does talk about phase 4 in the future. There's different segments. Some of it addresses phase 3, some of it moving forwards into phase 4. And I think we'll see a step change as we move forward into phase 4. There's a lot more emphasis on aligning ESOS with net zero aspirations and the government's aspirations for the country. And I think we'll see a much greater shift as we move into. I think phase 4 will be a radical change from phase 3 in terms of the work that's carried out and how it's carried out and the results from that.
Yeah, which, you know, it makes sense, doesn't it? Notwithstanding, I think with the recent increases in energy prices, the carbon conversation has taken a bit of a back seat over the last few months as people have been dealing with the energy crisis. But it's temporary, and it will be back on the agenda, I'm sure, when we're in the thick of phase 4.
Yeah, and I think just you think about the intentions of ESOS. The original intention is about saving energy. The net result of that is you save carbon, you save your carbon emissions. It's an incredibly useful tool, and it's very cost effective for a lot of organisations. But it's really enhancing that scheme, modernising it, moving it forwards to take us to that net zero road journey.
Okay, so here we are, a little more than 14 months to go until the compliance date. Yeah. Why should companies act now?
Right, well, the forward-thinking companies acted 2.5 years ago.
Oh, right.
We've on the back of COVID restrictions, we've been carrying out energy surveys as part of ESOS Phase 3 for the last couple of years now. We've completed a lot of surveys. We've completed the survey set for a number of organisations. So in terms of that compliance journey, we're well on the way to completing Phase 3 work. Obviously, we've got the final year total energy consumption and registration to complete. And those companies are now benefiting from the opportunities that we've identified, and which is particularly important with the recent cost increases of energy. So they are already benefiting from that.
Yeah, I guess if they've implemented some of those projects, they're the big winners right now.
Absolutely, yeah. And the sooner you get the site reports, the surveys done, be it transport, be it your production facilities, your offices, etc., then the sooner you can identify and implement measures to mitigate that cost increase, or to help mitigate that cost increases by reducing your energy consumption and your associated carbon emissions in the long term.
All makes perfect sense to me, Derek. Yeah. So I guess if you were to summarise everything we've talked about today, you know, what are the key points that customers should be taking away from our chat?
I think ESOS, as I mentioned earlier, it's a very valid scheme. It's there to reduce energy consumption, reduction of energy consumption, direct cost reduction, there's a carbon emissions reduction. The consultation is looking at modernising the ESOS scheme from what has, in many people's eyes, become more of a compliance objective to moving it towards that assistance in the net zero journey. So we'll see a transformation of ESOS moving forwards. But ultimately, it's there. It's beneficial to many organisations, and many organisations have benefited significantly from a cost perspective, from an energy perspective, from a carbon reduction perspective. But it's simply just modernising the scheme and bringing it into the 21st century.
Yeah. So act now. Don't wait until the consultation has gone through Parliament, because there'll be a scarcity of lead assessors
and we don't
by
know
that time.
That will happen.
No. Yeah. Be careful choosing your lead assessor. Pick somebody who's got good experience in your sector with good support from a company that can deliver the project to a good quality and, importantly, on time. Yeah. And ultimately, a good quality ESOS report will identify cost savings, carbon savings, as well as ticking the compliance box.
Yeah, and we treat this as very much as a stepping stone into that carbon reduction journey moving forwards. So the work that we now do helps on that journey.
Well, thanks, Derek. It's been great catching up today. Really informative. I've really enjoyed it.
Good, thank you. Yeah, and as we find out more information about the consultation, particularly as it starts to go through Parliament, or does go through Parliament, we can catch up again and review the findings of that.
Super. Look forward to it.